When people ask whether Iran could stop a US invasion, they usually imagine a classic battlefield comparison: tanks versus tanks, jets versus jets, missiles versus carriers. That framing misses the real question. Stopping an invasion does not always mean destroying the invading force. Sometimes it means making the cost so high, the timeline so uncertain, and the escalation risk so unpredictable that the invasion never begins. To understand this, we need to define what invasion actually means. Is the objective regime change, a limited amphibious landing, a short air campaign to degrade infrastructure, or a coercive strike meant to signal dominance? Each objective carries a different price. The Persian Gulf is not just a body of water, it is a narrow insurance market. Every military action there carries a risk premium. The Strait of Hormuz is roughly 21 miles wide, at its narrowest navigable channel. Oil flows through it, global shipping flows through it. Energy prices respond to it within hours. That geography compresses distance and amplifies consequences. Iran's strategy is not built around matching American firepower. It is built around raising the cost of entry. Think in simple terms. If a US carrier strike group enters the Gulf, it does not just bring aircraft. It brings logistics ships, escorts, refueling cycles, surveillance aircraft, and layered defenses. Each of those layers consumes fuel, consumes time, consumes Tinsaceptor missiles. Now reverse the equation. Iran does not need to win a symmetrical fight. It needs to create enough friction that every additional day of operations becomes more expensive than the political objective eyes. In military planning, this is called denial strategy, not punishment through decisive victory, but denial through accumulated cost. A mine that forces a destroyer to slow down, a drone that triggers an expensive interceptor, a missile launch that forces defensive posture shifts. None of these individually win a war, but together, they alter the insurance calculation. For Washington, the question becomes, how much disruption is acceptable? How many days of instability can markets tolerate? How many regional bases must be defended simultaneously? Iran's objective is not necessarily to defeat the United States. It is to make the opening move look financially, militarily, and politically irrational. And that is where the real contest begins, not at the shoreline, but in the cost equation behind it. Modern war is not decided by who owns more platforms. It is decided by whose kill chain survives longer. A kill chain is simple in concept. Detect, track, decide, strike, assess, break any one of those links, and the entire system slows down. An invasion force depends on speed. Carrier aircraft must locate mobile launchers. Satellites must identify targets. Command centers must process data in minutes, not hours. Iran understands this. Instead of trying to win in the strike phase, it tries to complicate the detect phase. Mobile missile launchers do not sit in open fields. They relocate constantly. They use tunnels, hardened shelters, and civilian traffic patterns to blend movement into noise. A launcher that cannot be found cannot be destroyed. This transforms the battlefield into a search problem. Search problems consume time. Time increases exposure. Exposure increases cost. Air defense operates the same way. The question is not whether one system can stop every aircraft. The question is whether the network can force attackers to fly higher, burn more fuel, and devote more aircraft to suppression. Even older systems matter in this logic. A legacy radar does not need to defeat a stealth aircraft outright, it only needs to cue another sensor or trigger defensive maneuvering. That hesitation breaks tempo. The speed of operations is everything in modern campaigns. If air dominance takes longer than expected, if mobile launchers survive the first wave, if communications remain intact longer than planned, the invasion timeline stretches, and stretched timelines change political calculations. Iran's terrain amplifies this effect. Mountain ranges fracture radar coverage. Urban density complicates target discrimination. Coastal clutter interferes with maritime sensors. Every additional sortie required to confirm a target adds to operational fatigue. Every drone that must be tracked drains attention from higher-value threats. This is not about winning an air war outright. It is about ensuring that the attacker cannot achieve clean, rapid paralysis. Because if paralysis fails, then the invasion becomes incremental. And incremental operations create opportunities for retaliation, escalation, and regional instability. In this sense, the contest is not platform versus platform. It is system versus system. Whose decision loop remains intact? Whose sensors stay functional? Whose communications survive disruption? Iran's objective is modest but powerful. Do not dominate the sky. Just prevent it from becoming uncontested. And once uncontested dominance disappears, certainty disappears with it. Modern defense is often a math problem, not a heroic duel. Not a cinematic dogfight, a math problem. Consider a simple imbalance. An interceptor missile can cost hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars. A one-way drone or unguided rocket can cost a fraction of that. If one cheap system forces one expensive system to fire, the defender has already influenced the economic exchange. Now multiply that by dozens or hundreds. This is the logic behind saturation. Saturation does not require precision. It requires volume. mines scattered in a narrow channel, rockets launched in waves, drones arriving in clusters from multiple directions. Each individual threat might be manageable. Together, they stress the defense architecture. Naval commanders must assign escorts. Air defense crews must ration interceptors. Pilots must divert to protect high-value assets. Every defensive action consumes resources, fuel, maintenance hours, crew fatigue, replacement parts. In economic terms, this becomes a burn rate. How fast does the attacking force expend its high-end inventory? Because in sustained conflict, inventory depth matters. Iran's strategy appears designed around this exchange ratio. If it can force a destroyer to expend a magazine of interceptors to defeat a swarm of relatively inexpensive systems, the cost curve tilts. Even if none of the drones reach their target, the same applies on land. Short-range rockets do not need pinpoint accuracy. They only need to threaten staging areas, airfields, or supply depots. A disrupted airfield slows sortie generation. Slower sorties means slower suppression campaigns. Saturation also creates psychological friction. Commanders begin planning for worst-case density rather than average threat levels. That increases defensive posture, and defensive posture reduces offensive tempo. This is not a guarantee of victory. Saturation works only if production lines keep pace, if launchers survive long enough to reload, if command networks coordinate timing, but the economic logic remains consistent. When one side relies on fewer high-value platforms and the other side fields many lower-cost systems, the exchange ratio becomes central. It is not about destroying the entire fleet. It is about forcing expensive defenses to react repeatedly, because each reaction consumes something finite. And once finite inventories begin to shrink, strategic options narrow. In that narrowing space, deterrence gains leverage. Wars are rarely lost in the first exchange. They are lost in maintenance bays. An invasion campaign depends on sustained tempo. Sorties must continue. Ships must remain at sea. Missile inventories must be replenished. That requires logistics, fuel depots, spare parts, trained technicians, reliable transportation routes. For a sanctioned country, sustainment becomes both weakness and strength. On one hand, sanctions restrict access to cutting-edge components. Supply chains become fragile. Quality control becomes uneven. On the other hand, isolation forces adaptation. When spare parts cannot be imported, they must be manufactured. When platforms age, they must be extended. When foreign contracts collapse, domestic workshops expand. Over decades, this builds a culture of mechanical improvisation. It does not produce perfection, but it produces continuity. In defensive warfare, continuity matters more than peak performance. A slightly outdated system that functions reliably can be more valuable than a modern system grounded by missing parts. Iran's military structure reflects this trade-off. Mixed fleets of old and upgraded platforms create complexity. Training pipelines must accommodate different technologies. Inventory management becomes complicated, but the underlying principle is simple. If you expect to fight under embargo conditions, you design for self-repair. Geography reinforces this logic. Iran's mountainous terrain fractures road networks. Extreme heat stresses engines and electronics. Remote border regions complicate rapid reinforcement. Logistics in this environment must be resilient, not elegant. For an invading force, sustainment challenges are different but equally real. Operating carrier groups in confined waters increases fuel consumption. High sortie rates accelerate maintenance cycles. Interceptors and precision munitions must be replenished from distant depots. The longer the campaign continues, the more the supply chain stretches. This is where time becomes a weapon. If early strikes fail to disable production facilities, if missile stockpiles remain partially intact, if mobile units survive beyond the first week, the conflict shifts from rapid dominance to sustained pressure. And sustained pressure exposes structural weaknesses. Sanctions have forced Iran to build redundancy into production. Multiple small facilities rather than single points of failure. Dispersed storage rather than centralized depots. This does not make the system invulnerable, but it complicates decisive knockout blows, because in prolonged conflicts, the side that can repair, resupply, and reorganize faster gains leverage, not through dramatic breakthroughs but through endurance. And endurance reshapes strategic patience. Every war plan contains an end state. For an invading power, the objective might be clear. Neutralize key facilities, disable command centers, force political concessions, or in the most extreme case, remove a regime. For a defending state like Iran, the objective is often narrower. Survive the first wave, preserve enough capability to retaliate, extend the timeline, complicate political certainty. This difference matters, because if the attacker's goal requires decisive control, while the defender's goal requires only endurance, the burden of proof shifts. Escalation becomes the central variable. If maritime traffic is disrupted, oil prices spike, regional states feel pressure, global markets respond within hours. If missile exchanges widen beyond a single theater, neighboring bases and cities enter the equation. If proxy actors become active, the battlefield expands beyond borders. Each layer of escalation increases unpredictability, and unpredictability raises political cost. A rapid, limited strike campaign is easier to justify than an open-ended regional confrontation. Iran's posture appears designed to blur that boundary, not necessarily by launching immediate full-scale retaliation, but by maintaining the credible option: ballistic missiles that can reach regional infrastructure, drones that can harass shipping lanes, naval forces that can threaten choke points. These tools do not need to win outright. They only need to create the possibility of widening conflict. From Washington's perspective, this creates planning friction. Any operation must consider second-order effects. How quickly can escalation be contained? How many regional partners are willing to absorb retaliation? How much economic shock can be tolerated? From Tehran's perspective, survival equals success. If infrastructure damage is limited, if command networks endure, if deterrent forces remain intact, then the narrative shifts from invasion to stalemate. An asymmetric strategy is often sufficient. This does not mean an invasion is impossible. It means it is unlikely to be clean, fast, or isolated. The question is not whether the United States could defeat Iranian forces in a conventional sense. The question is whether it could do so quickly enough, cheaply enough, and predictably enough to achieve its political objective before escalation reshapes the map. In that uncertainty lies the core of Iranian strategy. Not domination, not parity, but strategic hesitation. And sometimes, hesitation is the strongest shield of all.